Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Tech Talk, Potential of Everyday Technology for OT. My name is Amanda. I'm the Marketing Manager here at AOTA, and I'm going to point out a few things about today's presentation. First, CE. You can earn 1 CE contact hour for each webinar attended during Member Appreciation Week. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive an email from AOTA Webcast containing a link to your CE certificate. However, you must stay on for the entire webinar until you view the pop-up screen that says the webinar is now over in order to receive your CE certificate email. Next, questions. On the left side of your screen, you'll see an Ask a Question pod. This is for you to type in questions you may have for our presenters throughout the webinar. Questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar, and the presenters will do their best to answer as many questions as time allows. And last, resources. Additional resources for this webinar can be found in the Event Resources pod located below the Ask a Question pod. Simply click on the pull-down arrow to view the available resources. And with that, let me introduce today's presenter, Tony Gentry. Tony?
Yep. Are we ready to go? Okay, hi everybody. Thanks. Okay. Hi everybody. Thanks for sitting in today for my talk on everyday technology in OT. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. It's a beautiful fall day here, and I wish the same for you wherever you may be. As these learning objectives show, the tools I aim to discuss include smartphones, smart homes, and body-worn health trackers. These are consumer technologies that may be conveniences for most of us, but they can be occupationally enabling and even life-changing for people with disabilities. Our task in OT and in AT is to help people do their own thing, functioning more independently and safely. These consumer technologies can help others get where they want to go. Using these devices in therapy requires a little bit of a shift of perspective for the therapist. Because we all use these tools on our own, it's easy to forget that they can be unfamiliar to our clients. A person may be good at texting or playing Angry Birds, but get pretty lost trying to use their mobile device as a cognitive aid in other ways. It's also easy to fill up a person's screen with apps, thinking we can help them, and that can be pretty confusing. In using mobile devices as cognitive aids, for instance, I like to keep my intervention down to 4 or 5 apps and make sure those are the only apps on screen, if possible. You want to introduce one app and one strategy at a time. See how the person uses that support for a week or so, and then add another if it's needed. It's a mix and match, trial and error effort. What I'm talking about is using a mobile device as an assistive technology. So everything you know about assessing a person's OT needs and doing AT intervention applies. One last thing before we get started. For most of us, mobile phones and tablets are cool conveniences. They sneak into our lives and we can't live without them, we feel. But for people with disabilities, if they're lucky enough to have access to these devices, and if someone has taken the time to show them how to use them to help manage everyday tasks in the ways we're going to be talking about this afternoon, they can be life changers, really serving as powerful supports for safety, independence, and function. These things do work, but they need you to make that happen. As with any assistive technology, it's a two-part proposition: the device and the therapist who conducts an assessment and an intervention to help make the device fit the person and the needs that the person has. The biggest mistake any therapist can make is to send someone off to Home Depot to pick up a smart home kit, and then you just walk away. Here are some thoughts about using mobile devices as assistive technologies. People with cognitive behavioral challenges are the least likely disability group to use AT. I think that's because we tend to think that learning to use a smartphone or a tablet may be too hard for them, but that's not what I've found. These devices are pretty intuitive to use right out of the box. We've all seen videos of infants jamming away on their iPads. In using the strategies we'll be discussing, you can avoid some of the confusing things. It's important to keep in mind while we're talking today that you don't have to, you don't want to throw the kitchen sink of apps and devices and affordances at anybody. It's the simple things that are well chosen and tried out in a person's everyday life that work. Probably the most powerful mobile tool in the kit is just a simple reminder alarm, and that's available on any flip phone. It's the first thing I introduce to my clients, and it's a tool every one of them uses. It's important to keep in mind, too, that everything we talk about today may be obsolete or replaced with some much cooler toy tomorrow. Technology changes at light speed, so we need to share what we've learned with each other and keep each other up to date. I have a Facebook page, for instance, called Assistive Technology for Cognition, where I post new discoveries and where you can add your own. Like that if you like. At the end of this talk, we'll have time for some discussion too, so please share your own adventures in everyday tech. Keep in mind, as I said before, that by federal law, the definition of assistive technology includes you and the device, the person who chooses the device and trains your client to use it. Of course, in everyday practice, my definition will include the end user, their chosen task, and the everyday environments where they wish to perform those activities. This picture is of Krishnan, a young man with autism who uses his iPod Touch to support task switching and performance, primarily using the Notes app, audio recordings, and reminder alarms at his first ever job as a worker at Hardee's here in Richmond, Virginia. So thinking like an OT and like an AT practitioner, a few tips for using everyday technologies as AT. As with any assistive technology, wheelchair, mobile phone, whatever, first assess functional challenges in everyday life. Then compare those functional challenges to the human support the person now has that are needed in order to perform their chosen tasks. Ask, is there a low-tech or electronic substitute that can provide some of that support? Seek the simplest, most straightforward solution that may work. Provide training and follow along in real-world situations to test how useful the chosen solution may be. Do that one problem at a time. And as I mentioned before, if you're using a mobile device with apps, aim for no more than 4 or 5 apps for cognitive behavioral support. If your client has a smartphone, whether it's an Android, an Apple, or a Microsoft version, then the apps on the list that I included with my talk will work for them. Just keep in mind that you can't use an Apple app on an Android phone and vice versa. As a therapist, it helps to be familiar with the different operating systems and the apps that are available for each of them. At this point, Apple seems to have the edge in apps to help people with disabilities, but that may change. In my research, I've primarily used Apple iPod Touches. That's because they have all the features of an iPhone, except the actual phone. They're cheaper and they don't saddle you with a monthly bill. I like them too because it's easy to wear one on a belt clip or a lanyard and keep your hands free for work without the risk of setting it down and losing it. An inexpensive solution, if you don't want to spend the money on a new iPod Touch, would be using an older version of the iPhone with the phone plan turned off. You can get them fairly cheaply online. Working hands-free is harder to do with an iPad, and if you're using one to help you get your work done and set the thing down, it will walk away. But for people with dexterity challenges, for people who need a more powerful speaker for augmentative communication, or to hear reminder alerts in noisy environments, or for people who can see a large screen better, they can work well. Of course, there are Android and Microsoft tablets out there too. That's the devices, but the really big deal is the apps. This slide shows how many apps were available last summer at this time, the largest being Android at 1.6 million, with Apple at 1.5 million right behind them. We're drinking from a fire hose, trying to help our clients. In this talk, I want to share with you some of my own favorite apps and lead you to others so the flood is a little easier to handle. The list I gave you provides reliable, inexpensive, and supportive apps that should help go with this talk and help you get started if you're just getting started using these things. Okay, so let's imagine an interview with your client who may benefit from using their smartphones in a new way to help them function more independently. In a nutshell, these are the questions you may wish to consider. Can you make use of a mobile device? The different operating systems all offer versions of accessibility settings. Apple's are the most robust. Whether an iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad, they all read text on screen, allow speech to text, provide zoomed images and adjustments to a person's tap, along with a range of other accessibility features. We won't have time to go into these in this short talk today, but it's important for an OT to know about them and how to use them, since most of our clients will not be aware of how these settings work or how they can help. I do want to mention one relatively new feature, though. Using the switch control setting, a person with severe mobility impairment can scan and select apps, content within apps, and search the web and type. An add-on switch like AbleNet's Bluetooth connected device can link to that setting, and you can plug in external switches, of any type. A byte switch, a proximity switch, sip and puff, whatever your client needs, to the Bluetooth. That's a powerful feature. Similarly, the voice recognition and speech-to-text, text-to-speech features of mobile devices have made them accessible to people who are blind. You've seen ads, no doubt, showing how people who are deaf use them too. With your expertise and these devices, virtually anyone can access and use a mobile device. Apple and Google have good instructional videos and web pages, and there are lots of other videos on YouTube that show you how to use the Bluetooth switch and other add-on devices if you're interested. So now you know that the person can access the device. The next question for people who have cognitive behavioral challenges is this. Let's go through your day from morning to night. What do people have to ask you to do, remind you to do, or nag you to do? A lot of times I'll sit with both the person and a caregiver to ask these questions, make sure both agree on this particular annoying question. And then once I have a list of the things that people are being nagged to do, I'll ask, what are the most important items on that list? What are your priorities for getting away from having the person needing to nag you? Because what I'm trying to do is use a low-tech or an electronic reminder substitute for human support for these tasks. All smartphones have reminder functions, of course, but the key here, people with memory or attention problems can benefit from a whole lot of reminders, more than you'd ever use yourself. Here's an example of one actual worker's reminder alarms. Look at the reminders needed to get him out of the house for work. And at the end, an important one, charge the device at night so it's ready for you tomorrow. This is an example of the robust way an app can be used as a cognitive support. A consideration here, too, is who will program these reminders. Some people can learn to do it themselves. Others need a caregiver to do the programming, and their job is to respond to the message. I like to set a reminder at the end of the day to get the person and maybe their caregiver together so they can sit down and program any non-routine reminders coming up the following day. The reminders that come with smartphones just beep at you and show you a printed message. For some people, that doesn't work. There are a number of specialized reminders on the market that work better. I'm going to switch to my speakerphone and see if you can hear me better. I'm getting a message that some people are hearing me muffled. Again, let me know if this is working for you. The Bug Me app allows you to include picture prompts for people who can't read, and Vocal is a voice reminder for people who are non-readers or those with visual impairment. I'm a fan of specialized medication apps too. My Pillbox and Pill Reminder are good ones that not only show you a picture of the pill to take, they also have checkoff boxes, so you know you've taken your meds and you don't double dose because you forgot having taken your pill. So you've got a reminder app in place, and the person you're working with is following them to move from task to task across their day. What happens when a person gets alerted to do an activity, but they can't remember how to actually make it happen? They forget or they skip steps, they get lost, they get confused. Getting set up is a problem, following the steps, pacing themselves, dealing with situations that occur, keeping at it, making sure they do it right, whether it's a task or simply interacting with other people. How can a mobile device help a person manage all of this? Well, if you haven't checked out the new features of Apple's Notes or Android's Keep organizational app recently, you may be amazed by all the things these apps can do. You can build to-do lists with checkoffs and add pictures. You can sketch the steps of an activity in words or pictures so that a person can have that multi-step guide while performing the task. And in both cases, these apps come with a device, no extra cost, they're free. I've laid out an entire day's activities with picture prompts and to-do list checkoffs for clients using Notes, and it's worked really well. Some clients, that's all they need. Another way to help people perform complex tasks is with a picture-based slideshow. Plan It, Do It, Check It Off allows you to create multi-step slideshows with photos you shoot and with self-dictated audio prompts that are saved inside the app and right there for the person to use when they need support. On the picture here, you'll see someone who has 12 different task activities that they need support for during the day. They tap on the task they want to do at this particular time, and that slideshow fills the screen. They simply slide back and forth to get the task completed. Probably the most comprehensive way to teach someone how to do a complex task is with an instructional video. The research supporting the use of video modeling as a learning tool is quite convincing, and I've seen the method work really well in my own practice. All mobile devices now, of course, have video camera and playback capabilities built in. So creating instructional videos and making them available to our clients is easier than ever. You may want to build short instructional videos for task sequencing, wayfinding in the community, or providing behavioral cues or social stories for people who are interacting in challenging environments and situations. In creating the videos, keep in mind that the person will probably be watching it on a pocket-sized device. You want to make the videos short and to the point, shoot in close-up with good lighting, and provide a voiceover directly as you shoot so you don't have to edit in vocal cues later. The trick to teaching with video modeling is to have the person watch the video just before performing the task, having it available to play it and pause it while they do the task, and then asking them to review the video one more time afterwards to compare what they did to what the video showed. You want them to use that method a lot in different situations so the learning generalizes. That's video modeling in a nutshell. One problem with using videos on smartphones is that it can be hard to locate the video when you want to use it. The Functional Planning System is an app that makes shooting and organizing instructional videos easy. You can see this person's list of daily activity videos on the left of their screen. Easy to follow. And you can even set alarms in the app, so when the alarm goes off, the appropriate instructional video pops up automatically on screen. That saves your client from having to find the video when the reminder alert goes off. Another similar app that I like a lot, I don't have a picture for it, is called CanPlan. It works like the functional planning system and maybe even more easy to use. Unfortunately, for Android users, both of these apps are Apple iOS only. If you know of an Android app that does the same thing, I'd like to hear about it. So if your client can navigate their mobile device, if they have appropriate reminders in place so their caregivers don't have to nag them, and they have instructional supports on board to guide them in performing complex tasks, your next step may be to ask, so how are you doing? And consider making use of apps or body-worn monitors to track your client's health conditions, such as fatigue, sleep, pain, exercise, and stress. We're all familiar with Fitbits. Newer devices just beginning to hit the market can also reliably track heart rate, grand mal seizures, and even hard falls, alerting caregivers if something happens. The real standout here is the Apple Watch version 4. Previous editions of the Apple Watch seemed to promise more than they could deliver, but the new Apple Watch 4 has finally begun to really take advantage of the many sensors that come on the watch's back. This watch is the first I've seen that can reliably detect a hard fall and notify a caregiver even if you're out cold on the floor. It can track heart rate and act as a single lead electrocardiogram to track heart rhythm for real-time heart health monitoring. It can detect and alert caregivers of seizure activity. As you see here, there's an emergency SOS option too. With an add-on app on your iPhone, the watch can track glucose levels without a pinprick. As with the previous versions, it does a pretty good job of health coaching. It is amazing. Keep in mind, though, that Apple Watches only work if you have an Apple mobile device to talk to them. And as you probably already know, Apple Watches are way expensive, and so are iPhones. There are other watches that claim to do some of these things. The Embrace watch by Empatica, for instance, is a good sleep and fitness tracker, but also monitors emotional stress and alerts caregivers of grand mal seizures, while also tracking seizure intensity and duration. I've used it with two of my clients who have intractable epilepsy, and it's worked well for them. A big challenge for any outpatient OT, or doctor for that matter, is getting a reliable report of a client's condition and behavior between clinic visits. I've begun using health tracking apps that ask clients to record how they're feeling from time to time across the day. The free Mood Tracker app for both Apple and Android is a good example. You select a condition you want to track from an on-screen list, set reminder alerts, and then when the alarm goes off, you answer a few questions about your mood or your headache or your stress. You can see the slider questionnaire on the right picture on the Mood Tracker slot. What's great about these apps is what happens when you go back to the clinic. I might ask, so how have you been feeling since I saw you last? And instead of saying, oh, okay, I guess, your client whips out his phone, and there's a detailed graph showing all his ups and downs across the day, the week, the month. So you can adapt your intervention to what's really going on in your client's real life. The free Simple app allows you to create from scratch any number of symptoms, whatever symptoms are appropriate for a given client. You make them up. You type in whatever you want to track. You can see here how that might be customized for a particular person. And the app keeps a graphic record of those symptoms. You can add in other parameters too, such as how often they did their home exercise program, when they took their medications, and other things. It gives you a rich scan of how all these things interact with each other across the day. So let's summarize some of the ways I like to use mobile devices and health trackers to support everyday activities. Of course, as I mentioned, assess your client's skills, their needs, the activities they want to do. the supports they already have in place, and environments where they want to do these things, as you would with any OT intervention. Then consider the basic adaptations we've discussed. Some people will only need reminders. Some might need instructional support for some activities. Some may benefit from falls detection, seizure detection, symptom tracking. Consider the right column of this slide too. These are add-on tools that extend the usefulness of any mobile device. Sometimes a behavioral contract, some kind of reward for using the device appropriately, helps the person get into using it at first. But once they understand that people are no longer nagging them, that they can do things on their own that they couldn't do before, that if something happens, like I fall down, they'll get help, that's the real reward. That's when people fall in love with their devices and begin to use them religiously. Let's move from things you wear or that fit in your pocket to the smart home environments we see advertised so heavily these days. Again, like mobile devices, these are gee whiz conveniences for most of us. But for people with disabilities who want to live more independently and who doesn't, they can be necessities. Who needs a smart home? People with mobility limitations have used smart home technologies since the 1960s. People with attention, memory, or other cognitive problems who may need some kind of support to help them get through their day. People who have medical care needs. People who are at emerging risk of nursing home placement. And anyone who's motivated to increase their independence through the use of assistive technology. Because smart homes can improve your safety and security, assist with mobility, transfers, access in and out of the home. They can automate routine appliance functions. They can allow remote control of home features using a variety of access tools and supports. They can provide communication tools, including passive occupant monitoring that I'll get into in just a minute. And they can assist with task support, shopping, bill paying, and social interaction. As with any OT or AT assessment, your interview with a client needs to look into the following items. You want to assess their functional abilities and interests, their human support resources, the environmental supports they already have in place, ask about any safety concerns they may have, ask about any medication management concerns they may have, and then get into the things that we as OTs always ask about. How are you doing your ADLs? How are you managing your IEDLs? We have to consider financial resources, what's available to them, because most of the devices we've been talking about today are not paid for by insurance. And then we work collaboratively with our client to problem solve solutions that may help them manage their home better and manage their life in their home better. When you look at using smart home technologies that control lighting and appliances, another important question to ask is, what is your best access tool for remote control? This is especially important for people who have severe mobility impairments. Electronic aids to daily living that open doors or manage lights and appliances using a remote control switch have been around for years, of course. Important to the generally low-cost home safety devices may include stovetop monitors, tub overflow monitors, automatic coffee pots, motion-activated lighting, especially on stairways and in bathrooms, window escape systems, medical alert medallions, automated bill paying, and passive monitoring, which I'll talk about in just a minute. I want to comment for one moment on the automated bill paying item. People who have cognitive changes very often forget to pay their bills. I've had 2 clients in my career who lost their homes because they forgot to pay their rent. So if there's a way to set those up or suggest having it set up for your client, I highly recommend it. Other mid-tech electronic devices can work wonders for people with mobility challenges or cognitive impairment. Automated grocery ordering and delivery, automatic water planting devices. We all know the famous Roomba robot vacuum cleaner, and there are now automated pet feeder and plant watering devices as well. The big question in smart home decision making is what can be controlled remotely? Basically, the answer is if it's electronic and it runs on household power, and if it has an on-off switch, then remote control is possible for lights and lamps, media equipment, fans, motorized doors, window shades, door locks, a thermostat, and of course your phone and your computer. In talking with your client, you need to consider these 4 questions. What do you want to control? What is the best switch based on your mobility? What is the best transmitter of your command? And what technology will operate the device based on your command? That's because every smart home enabled appliance requires some kind of module that connects to the appliance, some kind of remote control switch, and some kind of transmitter to send the message between the switch and the appliance module. That is true of all smart home solutions, and it goes all the way back to the old X10 systems that have been around since the late 1960s. So, your remote control. That can be a phone, a tablet, a PC, or it can be a dedicated push-button remote control device. You can also program smart appliances to run themselves on a schedule if they're based on a computer or on your phone. Going back to what we discussed earlier about switch access on smartphones, if you run your devices from a phone or a tablet, you can use any switch you like to navigate the screen and run your smart home. Head control, sip and puff, eye gaze, voice enabled. In other words, there's a remote control device for everybody. The transmission system is where things get complicated. Competing technologies include X10, Insteon, Zigbee, and Z-Wave. When you set up a smart home for someone, up front, you have to decide which of these transmission formats you want to use and make sure all your appliance modules fit that format. It's kind of like deciding whether you're an Apple person or an Android person. You stick with your own constellation. There are easy ways to make that decision without getting into all the complication of these competing technologies. Here's one way. If you're an Apple iPhone user, when you go to the hardware store, just make sure the items you get have this label on them, works with Apple HomeKit. That's all you need to know. Or you may want to go with the Samsung SmartThings suite and let that name brand dictate your purchases. Both Apple HomeKit and Samsung SmartThings solutions require your client to have home Wi-Fi. If your home doesn't have internet, you can choose the old X10 systems with a dedicated remote control device, or an Insteon system, which can work with or without Wi-Fi. Sometimes your client will want to live on their own, but they wish someone could keep an eye on them from afar, just to ensure their safety. But nobody wants to be eavesdropped on with a video camera or a microphone. Here's another way to help. A few new smart home modules that can be really useful in passively monitoring a home occupant for their safety include motion sensors, arrival departure sensors, and doorway sensors, all linked to your smart home suite. You can arrange them to keep track of activities without the use of a camera. Here are some likely locations. Picture shows motion sensors placed to cover a living space. Arrival sensors could be hooked to a key ring, placed in a backpack, or in a car to trigger when the sensor leaves or arrives at home. And doorway sensors that trigger when the door is opened or closed can be attached not just to entrance doors, but to medicine cabinets, the bathroom door, a refrigerator. The idea is to think this through and locate a few sensors that will give you, the off-site caregiver, assurance that your loved one got out of bed, took their medicines, did not wander away. It's not a perfect solution, but for some people, when you're thinking about smart home technologies, it's a good one. The sensors speak to an app on the caregiver's phone. You program them to send a text message if, for instance, the door to the medication cabinet was not opened, or grandma went in the bathroom but didn't come out again. Here's my phone with the 3 SmartThings sensors I've installed. One at the garage door, another at our front door, and a third one, don't tell him, in the glove compartment of my son's car. So I'm trying to demystify the magic of smart homes a little bit. On TV, it all looks so cool. Setting up a smart home is an individualized project that requires skilled activity analysis and key decisions about switch access, transmission options, and exactly what you want to control remotely. It's usually a good idea to introduce one smart home device at a time, letting a person get used to it on a loaner basis, and then discussing with them what next to try. Anytime you try to change or adapt anything in anyone's home, you are walking into a hornet's nest, and you want to be careful about all these adaptations. One of the questions they're going to ask is, how much does this all cost? Well, here's an example I put together that cost a little over $1,000. Let's take a look at that just for a minute and see what I installed. With those devices in place, you can access the home through the garage door, control 4 lights and or appliances of your choice, manage the thermostat, manage the overhead fan, broadcast smoke or carbon monoxide alerts to a loved one, and passively monitor activity in the home. You can also automate all of these actions based on triggers or scenes, and while you're away from home, you can manage them via Apple TV. The question you want to ask is, these devices may support safety, home access, and functional independence, along with providing some peace of mind for an off-site caregiver. And in conversation with your client, consider, is that expensive or not? And that, in many cases, is where the real challenge arises. Right now, insurance won't pay for anything I've discussed today. You pay out of pocket to make this happen. Of course, if you're a military veteran or you're involved in a state-sponsored vocational rehab program, your chances of having these things covered are better. The mobile device solutions may be a part of a student's IEP. Some states have low-interest loan programs for assistive technology purchases. These things can really make life safer and more functional for people with disabilities. So we need to advocate. I could talk about this stuff all day, but I'm going to close now and get into whatever discussions we might want to have. Just keep in mind, my point always is that mobile and smart home technologies offer truly life-changing opportunities for people with disabilities. We need to keep up with all this consumer technology coming down the pike and make use of them in our practice. And we need to stay in touch as we learn how to do that. Thank you. Let's chat. So I'm going to read a question as it pops up and try to give an answer. The first question is, are there any apps for patients with low cognition that would allow them to contact family, friends, or the police in case of an emergency in an easy manner? What I tend to do in these situations, I try to make use of Facebook FaceTime or Skype as a video chat opportunity, and I put a program in with my clients, a quick dial for the person they want to most access. So they tap on FaceTime, and that pops the person pops up, and they go immediately to them to have a conversation that includes video. I'll give you an example of how that worked really well for a client of mine. She was a lady with a brain injury that I know. She was 4 blocks from her house, got completely disoriented, couldn't find her way home. She opened FaceTime, tapped her mom, got her mom on FaceTime, and by panning the video around in the environment, her mom was able to figure out where she was and then walk her home with the FaceTime video on as she walked her way through the neighborhood. That's one way you could do it. That's what I would recommend for starters. The next question another question I'm seeing is, does health insurance, Medicare, or Medicaid pay for any devices or apps? And I think I answered that question as I was wrapping things up this afternoon. The device used to track seizures, the Apple Watch 4 can do that with an app you add an app to your iPhone to detect the seizures, and then the Apple Watch's sensors pick that up and feed into the app to detect the seizures. The other one is called it's an Empatica app. You see, I can slide back to where I was with that so you can see what I was talking about. Here it is, the Embrace Watch by Empatica. A question about using voice-activated lighting in the home. Yeah, that's a fairly straightforward thing to do with the Apple HomeKit apps, the Samsung SmartThings apps. Those can be controlled by your Amazon Echo. There are also apps that can be controlled by Google Home as well. And that's a good thing to do, except I will comment on that. In a busy, loud home environment, these voice-activated devices are going to have trouble hearing you and understanding you. Also, if you have any difficulty in articulating what you're trying to communicate, voice activation can be a problem. Question about setting up switches for a person with a C4 spinal cord injury. What switches would you recommend for them? Most people that I know who have some kind of C4 spinal cord injury might use a bite switch. They might also use eye gaze to control, to link themselves to probably an Apple device, maybe an iPad that's set in front of them, and that device, by using that kind of switch and something like the Bluetooth switch interface, they'll be able to navigate to one of the apps that controls all their smart home technologies. That's a fairly new way to make use of these tools for someone at a C4 spinal cord injury level, but it's an inexpensive way compared to the strategies that were available once upon a time. The question about whether there's an Android version of fall detection, and as far as I know, there is not. A question of what is the name of the Facebook page that I mentioned. It's called Assistive Technology for Cognition. Question about having clients trial an app to see if it works before having the clients purchase it for apps that have a cost. What I do in my own business is I have loaners, and I provide those loaners to people. They try them out in their home, and if they work, then I'll download the app to their own device, and they can continue to use it that way. I recommend that for any assistive technology. Always, if you can, provide a loaner that people can use in their everyday life before they buy in and try to use it themselves. A question of whether I'm using the Amazon Echo with clients. Right now I have not been doing that. And the reason I haven't done that with my clients have either Android smartphones or Apple smartphones right now, and with using Siri or Google Now the voice activated features on the Android devices, you can do everything that you can do with an Amazon Echo, and you can carry your phone around with you, so you don't have to be in the room with the device to make the things you want to have happen. I think that until there's a way to get Amazon Echo all through the house, carrying your phone with you and using that as your voice activation control makes more sense. Question about whether we need to come up with more affordable tech to track seizure and mood and that sort of thing as compared with the Apple and Embrace. Yeah, these prices hopefully will come down. Whether Apple's ever going to do that, I don't know. The Embrace watch is made by a small company that's just trying to get themselves off the ground. We'll see. The cost of the watch, the Embrace watch that I showed after the Apple Watch, the one that I have on the screen right now, I think that watch is in the $250 to $300 range. Question about whether I've come across certain apps that help people in the working environment in particular. I've done a lot of research working with people who have brain injuries and people who have autism in the vocational environment. And what I've been using to make that work for the people are the things I talked about this afternoon. If you are an AOTA member and you're interested, go to the OT Practice web pages on the AOTA website, and there's 2 or 3 OT Practice articles that I published in the last couple of years that speak to using apps in the vocational environment for people who have cognitive behavioral challenges. And they may give you some more information than I can share with you this afternoon. There's a question about elderly patients who are reluctant to use technology and how do you get buy-in for your patient. I think that's true for any, you probably found this too, this is probably true for any adaptation you want to make to anyone's house or when you're trying to help them manage something using an unfamiliar device. The model that I always think about is diffusion of innovations model. And what I try to do when I'm working with someone is think, what technology are you comfortable with? And can I somehow provide a technology that's a little bit different, provides a little bit more of an affordance, but is still familiar enough for you to be comfortable using it? That's not always possible. People who have never used a computer, it's a big jump from a typewriter to an iPhone. But what I'm always trying to do is take them that one next step. And what I've been really gratified to find, and my students have been doing a lot about this too, is there are lots of elderly folks who feel like they've been left behind and they want to be a part of the new world of mobile devices and smart homes. So they are energized by the idea of learning how to use maybe the simplest pieces of these things. And that's what I try to do as well. Take one step at a time, see if it works for you, see if you're comfortable making it happen, and then move on to the next thing. But I agree, it can be a real challenge. There's a question about liability. If we were to recommend using a medication app for someone, and if there's some accident, and they're talking about home health where nurses are assisting with the setup. And again, I agree that this is an overlap in our practice frameworks. So yes, nursing is very often the profession that manages medication. However, lots of nurses don't know about medication apps or pill dispensers or automated pill dispensers that we may know about. So collaborating with them and solving these problems, I think, is a good way to make sure that we've covered all our bases and helped our clients safely. There's a question about trackers for people who might elope or get lost or run away. What I like about iPhones is the Find My Friends app that comes free on them, so that anyone can become a friend, and as long as you can find the phone if you can't find the person, no matter where they may be. There are also apps for Android devices that allow you to track someone from one location to another using that app. And I think I put a couple of them on the list I provided to you this afternoon. There's a question about apps that might support someone when they're having a panic attack or having an anxiety attack, maybe somebody with PTSD. There are a couple apps that I put on the list I gave you that I have used myself, and that my wife, who's an OT at the VA hospital here in Richmond, has used with folks who have PTSD. One of them I like a lot that's really simple and works really well even with children. It's called Breathe to Relax. It's simply a balloon that expands and contracts slowly, and you're supposed to breathe in and out with that balloon following those pictures. And it can be a good 1-minute meditation, take a deep breath app to help you get started breathing again. Question about what's the youngest age I've used apps and tech with, and in my experience, and I'm not used to using them with kids who are below elementary school. However, kids in the middle ages of elementary school, 3rd and 4th grade, are beginning to recognize that mobile devices, for instance, are not just toys. And once a young person can recognize that this device can be used for other purposes than playing games, then you can begin to help them take the next step towards using them as a functional aid. There's a question about the Apple IV detecting seizures. I think does it only pick up grand mal seizures? It definitely picks up grand mal seizures. However, and this is a brand new device that's just come out, and they're not making claims beyond grand mal seizures. However, if you go online and look through feeds about the different apps that pick up seizures using the Apple Watch, people are claiming that that as long as there's a tremor of some kind involved, the watch can pick that up and connect that to increased heart rate, so that the app makes a calculation that this person's trembling and their heart rate's increased. We think they're having a seizure, and that can trigger a message to a caregiver. I'm just reading through here. I haven't disappeared. There's a question about whether any of this is billable under Medicare and Medicaid, and how might I bill. Medicare, as I said before, does not cover these kinds of things. Medicaid, however, in different states may cover them. Here in Virginia, there's a Medicaid technology waiver that allows people to access assistive technology if they need it, up to about $5,000 a year. That's one way that a person can have that paid for. But as you all know, Medicaid's different in every state. And there's one question about people who are have decreasing or inconsistent cognition, who are not interested in using a smartphone because they can't use it, they don't know how to use it, maybe using a medic alert bracelet to protect them from falls, but they're not even wearing that because they're not really understanding what the purpose is, and they don't want to bother someone if they do fall. And what your question points to is a really good question that I've run into with every single one of the things I've talked about today. And that is, there are going to be people who just know or who can't access the device because of a misunderstanding about how it might be used. You can use all your clinical reasoning and all your persuasion and all your empathy to try to connect to people to help them understand how these things might work. But there are going to be some people that it just doesn't work for. And I'll give you another example. There was a gentleman I worked with not too long ago who was using a reminder watch that would beep to remind him to do things. He was fairly fresh after a brain injury, had a very limited attention span. The watch would go beep, beep, and everyone else in the room would know exactly what it meant, where it was coming from, and that he should look at his watch and do what it said. He would hear the beep and make no connection back to the watch because his attention span was so abbreviated. Other people might see a reminder, see what it says, read it, and by the time they've read the reminder and turned the phone off to go out and do the task, they've forgotten what the reminder said. So there are windows of people that these devices are problematic for. Question about whether Google Keep comes on Android phones or does it have to be downloaded. That depends on the Android phone. Some Android phones do have Google Keep installed automatically, and some you have to download. But again, it's free. It's also downloadable for free to Apple devices. There's a question about how I bill for time when working with these devices. What's interesting about, and unfortunate in a way, about being an OT who uses AT is there are billing codes for cognitive rehabilitation. There are billing codes for, of course, for helping anybody function better in their everyday life. And those are the codes I would use when I'm having any intervention. The problem is I can make a recommendation for the devices, and I can train people to use the devices and get paid for that through those codes, but I can't get the devices themselves paid for through those codes. That's where the challenge lies today. And what I recommend typically for people who have no other way of accessing them, most states now have some kind of low interest AT loan fund that's available to people who want to buy devices like this, and I would refer people to those, and I would write a letter as an OT suggesting that they might be helpful to help make the fund more likely. I got another message about paying for the intervention, and someone was kind enough to write that a code that can be used for self-care, home management, assessment, and intervention is 97535. Thank you, Mary Jo. There's a question about a good resource for a CODA that would like to learn basic information about technology. The classic textbook is Cook and Polgar's Assistive Technology. That's the textbook we use in our program. There's used versions available on Amazon. The new version that recently came out is pretty expensive. I also recommend that if you get a chance to go to a conference about assistive technology, try to go. The RESNA conference is a really good one each year. The ATIA conference in Florida, the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference in Florida, is a good one. And if you can begin to make connections that way, it's a good way to get started learning about AT. And there's a question about making a list of the billing codes and the reasoning for them, and I'd be happy to do that and share them in whatever way I can down the road. Thank you for making that recommendation. I think we're about at the end of our conversation, folks, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to stay online today, respond to me and chat with me, and I really hope we can continue having these conversations as we go forward. The only way we're going to keep up with all this new technology is by sharing what we learned, and it means a lot to me that you guys have sat in today. Thank you so much.